Hi, welcome to another great episode of Ayurveda for all seasons. Today, I am so excited to be here with Dr. Sheila Patel of Chopra Global. Dr. Sheila Patel is such an amazing wealth of information, and I'd love to introduce you about her and what she's doing, and then how she's going to talk to us today about how we can stay balanced throughout the season, which is so perfect and so fitting for our entire show. I'm Annette Figueredo. I am your host, and I'm going to get right into this with Dr. Sheila. So she is actually a board certified family physician. She's a medical doctor who practices family medicine and integrates Ayurveda into everything that she does. And we were just talking, and she was saying how lifestyle is really a key component in staying healthy. And so she's bringing that into her medical practice. And she has practiced full spectrum family medicine for 15 years or more, and is right now in San Diego, where she first joined the Chopra Center in Carlsbad, California, over a decade ago now. And so she was part of the medical team there. And she is also part of the team that certifies the health and meditation programs. And so those programs are available, and I'm sure she'll talk to us a little bit about that. And for anyone who wants to take advantage of that, you would be receiving a certification from Chopra Global. So that's pretty amazing. So I'm just excited to just dive in with her and pick her brain about everything related to how we can use these lifestyle choices to stay balanced throughout the changing seasons. And that's what we're here to really address, and to make known that you can affect how your body runs on a regular basis based on the choices that you make every single day. So I want to also say that Dr. Patel, besides all of the amazing work that she's done, she's on the clinical research team for the Chopra Foundation. And so they're actually bringing scientific validation to mind-body practices. She's the co-author of multiple publications on the subjects of meditation and Ayurveda, and she enjoys bringing the mechanisms of action of mind-body practices to others. So she's really out there sharing this knowledge and using her medical background combined with her mind-body background in Ayurveda to really help the scientific community to figure out what's working, what's not working, and bring this to light with true scientific data. That's amazing. I love anything that we can do to, show that the mind-body practices work. And it does take time and practice to actually get that information. So thank you, Dr. Patel, for being on the front lines, and on one of the forerunners of making that happen here in our country. And what I also will say is that she really believes in this integrative approach, and that's what she brings to her modern practice. So it's a modern conventional medicine combined with the traditional healing systems. And isn't that what Ayurveda is all about? So without further ado, welcome, Dr. Patel.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you. It's so nice to be here. And one of my favorite things to do is to talk about Ayurveda. So this is really fun. And it really was, as you mentioned, my career, I started in medicine as conventional medicine. So I'm an MD, and I trained in the regular conventional medical model. And I chose family medicine as my specialty because I wanted to focus on the person and understand the whole person and not just an organ system. I kind of knew that, to really understand someone's health, you kind of need the whole picture, and you need to understand what's happening in their lives and their communities. So there was some of that perspective, and preventive health was talked about, but it's not really set up the way Ayurveda truly is to, preventatively. It's, and, there are a few things we would do around preventive health, but really it was, as we were talking about earlier, just really treating disease once it's there. And I did practice for about 15 years in conventional medicine. And at that point, I realized, well, several years in, I realized, especially as a primary care physician, people would get sick. We would take care of them in the hospital, in the ER. And then they would come back to my office and say, what do I do now? I don't want to be on all these meds forever. I don't feel well still, all of the things. And I realized I didn't know what to do for them. That our training in Western medicine is fantastic for treating acute illness, and because it fits very well in a reductionist model. There's sometimes like one cause, one, treatment, it's a very linear model. And that works well for certain things, especially acute care, but it doesn't work at all for chronic disease. And so that's what I was seeing in primary care, all these people with chronic illness, and integrative medicine and things like that were just starting to blossom. So I started going to other conferences and just realizing like, oh yeah, there's a whole lot of things we didn't learn and that we don't understand. And that's how I wanted to practice. I didn't want to just give a medication for everything or send people off for procedures that more and more we were finding that's actually not really doing anything either, And so also my parents come from India, so I'm well aware of Ayurveda in some capacity as far as certain foods and certain herbs that you take and oil in the ears and, all the things my mom used to do in the kitchen. But I never appreciated it as this full, complete healing system until I started exploring more, but I came to Ayurveda because I thought, how did people heal and prevent disease? And how did my grandma and every people's grandmas, stay healthy and well? And I had lots of relatives that lived well beyond many of my patients, even though they had full access to, the Western medical system. So I became more and more interested in Ayurveda. And the more I learned, the more inspired I was, the more fascinated I was. And it just makes sense, and I had read Deepak's books for many years, and it was always just really spoke to me and how he integrates the science into, and now there's more than ever to validate Ayurveda. So, and there was a bunch of synchronistic events that happened that I landed here, not far from, where the Chopra Center was here in California, and started working there. And now it's 12 years later. And I just love it more and more. And I love our certification programs and helping teach people to go out in their communities and teach Ayurvedic lifestyle or teach meditation. And so that's, it's because I really think Ayurveda is really the next frontier of health and healing, not just ourselves, but the planet. When we heal ourselves, we're healing the planet too, like all of those conscious choices we make, mind, body, spirit. And that's another thing I love about Ayurveda is that everything you do, it has a physical benefit. We can talk about that. And it also has this energetic, subtle body benefit, emotional body, just that whole subtle body. And then when we're balancing the mind and the body, well, then of course our spiritual well-being can really start to shine and take over. And that's ultimately what Ayurveda is about. And that's what I loved about it is like, yeah, we're doing all these things, but ultimately it's about becoming enlightened and to live a purposeful, meaningful life and have joy. And that's what I was really searching for when I went into medicine, and so, yeah. And again, like with the seasons and all of the things that Ayurveda ties us back to nature. And that's just such a concept that we had and even still nobody in medicine talks about,
Not at all. Yeah.
Adjust your schedule.
An outlier if you bring that into your practice, if you're an MD, right?
Yeah. So I'm always a little cautious, so people don't think like, oh, I'm too woo woo or whatever, but I then that's why I really try to find the ways to talk about it in a scientific way or in a common sense way. I think people know, because we know Ayurveda is the science of life. And so when I say things like, the plants change every season, nature gives us different foods and fruits and vegetables, and no matter where you live on the planet, there were traditional ways that people prepared food for seasons and for the future seasons. And same thing happens, with us. And so, people will align with that because that makes sense to them. And sometimes I'll even say, like, if you can remember what your grandma did, because I grew up in Wisconsin, and people actually were very tied to the land. And there were a lot of people whose grandmothers and grandfathers were farmers. And I would say, they canned things in the fall for the long winter because they can't get fresh produce, because we can talk about the general principles in Ayurveda, eat these, certain foods, but people live everywhere on the planet and there's all different seasons. But you can always apply the practices of balance, figuring out what the dominant qualities are in each of the season and balancing with the opposite. And then you use the traditional ways of eating and food preparation that your ancestors did, because there was a lot of knowledge there.
Yeah, and I think that would be a great place to start. If you could give us like kind of the overview of the 4 seasons, what's the predominant quality of each, and then what we can do in each of the seasons. And I guess we should start when you give your tips. I think starting now for this, the next season, because we're right now in spring. So maybe the first season you could give us tips for is what do we do in that transition from spring to summer, since that's most relevant for everyone right now. But if you could give us like that overview, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. So, right, we're in spring, as the Northern Hemisphere. And, I always tell people too, because we teach this curriculum, with our teachers, that always to acknowledge there are people that live all over the planet. And so we are talking about the Northern Hemisphere and the typical kind of 4-season climate. I was just at the NAMA conference, the National Ayurvedic Medical Association, just last week. And I was in Tucson and it was like dry and hot. And, so, you have to think about also what's happening outside, look out the window, right? Connect to nature and see what qualities are there. But typically this is, and everywhere around the planet, there is a change going on because the earth is rotating around the sun. So everywhere there's a seasonal change going on, right? And so for us, it's spring going into summer. And so from the Ayurvedic perspective, late winter, early spring, this is like, the heavy nature, the cool nature has been accumulating. And this is the concept in Ayurveda that we want to do things before they become disease. So things start to accumulate. So that heavy, typically wet, in springtime. And again, I grew up in Wisconsin, so I absolutely understand these seasonal, the 4-season changes. Maybe snow's starting to melt, there's a lot of wetness, heaviness, again, like it could be spring showers and cloudy, but there's a little more kapha energy that's starting to accumulate. So by the time we're transitioning then, right, we're in kapha time right now. And then at this summer solstice, we'll go into Pitta time, but it's a transition, so I always tell people nature's an ebb and a flow like the tide. So it's starting to accumulate and peaks. And then as that's kind of slowly coming down, then Pitta is going to kind of take over for the summer. So right now we really want to focus on getting our bodies moving. So kapha is a heavy energy, it's cool. So we want to get things moving. And in Ayurveda, that's probably the number one thing that helps helps kapha to stay balanced is movement and lightness. So again, coming out of a cool winter, and maybe, and it's traditional and actually healthy for us to slow down a little bit. So in some ways we want to align, but also stay balanced with that. So we slow down a little bit, we stay indoors a little bit, it's cooler, maybe we feel less active, and that's okay because nature is less active during those times. But in order for that not to accumulate and become disease and, have extreme sinus issues and the allergies and all the stuff that comes with spring and weight gain, all of those kapha things, we want to start moving. So I just tell people, and again, with Chopra, we frame the Ayurvedic teachings in the pillars of well-being. So there's movement, there's nutrition, there's stress management, emotional regulation, sleep, and then self-care, which is again aligning with nature and your daily routine going along with nature. So as far as the movement, really start moving, getting active. Sometimes we focus like a lot on the food and we forget about the other pillars. So I always like to remind people, although yes, you want to start eating, lighter, drier foods, add a little bit of savory spice to help that Agni get your digestive fire get revved up from the kind of sedentary winter. You want to use a little more spice like cinnamon and black pepper and ginger and things like cloves. And so food is very important. And again, we want to focus on the other pillars as well. So if someone doesn't have a meditation practice going, I always recommend, seasonal changes are a good time to start a new regular routine. So because, the nervous system and stress management, when the nervous system isn't calm, then the body goes into fight or flight and it's hard to stay balanced. So meditation, deep breathing, something for stress management. Sleep, again, is really important. Sometimes people have been sleeping more, over the winter and early spring. And so now we focus on making sure you wake up early when the sun is starting to, the days are are getting longer. And so we need to align with that, maybe wake up a little earlier by 6 o'clock, go to bed by 10. So I just reinforce all of those basic circadian rhythm things.
Let me ask you, to pinpoint like the change of seasons, do you recommend that people go by the equinox? Like, would that be kind of the pivotal point that we should be looking at? And I know you said it's a transition, so it's not like it's like all of a sudden, bam, you're in, summer and it's all full-blown Pitta. Like, it's probably been coming, right?
Right,
but
right.
Is that what you suggest?
Yeah, so that kind of represents the peak. So that's why in Ayurveda, it was also recommended to do cleanses during season changes, which are the equinoxes and the solstices, because, again, late winter, early spring is, there's this kapha accumulation and it's really peaking at that equinox. And then even though it's actually starting to kind of transition and come down, and Pitta starting to come up for the summer, which will peak at the solstice, but the heaviest, still the most dominant energy is kapha during that time. And so in order to stay balanced throughout the whole spring until, summer comes, then we continue to do kapha balancing practices. Neti pot is great to do, nasya oil, with natural decongestants, those are all the self-care practices that we want to do, especially during this time if we've fallen off or not doing them. And of course, that helps amazingly for our allergies and all that. And then really, starting to transition the food, and that's very important because there's actually some very interesting science around the microbiome and how the microbiome is, of course, our body's in constant communication with nature, including our microbes. They know what time of year it is, no matter what the calendar says, because they're taking signals from the electromagnetic field and from the barometric pressure and the time of light and day. There are actually receptors all over our body that sense these things. And so the bacteria and other microbes, they sense that. And so there's some really interesting studies that show that certain bacteria are higher at certain seasons, and then they naturally go down in number, like in our gut. Most of the research has been in the gut. And then other bacteria start to go down during that time. And so when we eat what's seasonal and what's nature is providing, it's going to naturally be easier to digest and better for us, because actually, as we know now, the bacteria do most of the, a lot of the digesting for us. So we can't go wrong when we're eating seasonally. And again, even if you live in a cold climate and, you aligning yourself with how food was prepared to eat during the winter and early spring, when before food was, plentiful, produce, that's important too, because that will be naturally, better for us and easy to digest. When, again, I should say people are preparing it in a traditional way. So I always try to tell people, try to find like traditional recipes, because they would always incorporate, like in Ayurveda, we always want to get the 6 tastes, some kind of spice, a little bitter, a little astringent, etc. And that's good for everyone. But then
it's sweet, salty, sour, astringent, bitter.
Pungent, bitter, and astringent. Yeah, pungent. Yeah, it's a good spice. Yeah. So everybody, can do that. And no matter what your dosha, then during the springtime, you want to try to eat a little bit lighter, get maybe a little bit more pungent spices to get that digestive fire going, because it gets a little dull, from the winter time and not being as active. Movement, and even this is a good time to start dry brushing and, doing things that are moving the lymph, a little more vigorous, massage. If you do self-massage, again, we're thinking movement, invigoration, lightness, dryness, to balance the heavy, cold, stagnant,
dampness, stagnant dampness.
Sluggishness.
From
kapha. So then you'll stay balanced throughout the spring. And then, it's always important to, I always tell people, and especially during those cleansing times, but all throughout, is just to always examine to like what's going on in my mind, what's happening with my emotions, maybe. And we know there's like seasonal affective disorder. A lot of people feel heavy in the mind. They're feeling down, depressed. I have a lot of friends still in Wisconsin who are like, they get so tiring, those long winters. And you can, there's seasonal affective disorder. And so, what are the things you can do to keep your mind, light? Again, sometimes in traditional things, it was getting together with loved ones and community and listening to maybe invigorating music or singing or, doing something that lightens the mind, release things that aren't serving you, so doing some kind of emotional reflection and how that's affecting your mind coming out of the winter and you're carrying that then into the springtime. So that's a really good practice to do too. I love journaling, and just telling people to do some kind of spring release, actually I have on we have a Chopra meditation and well-being app that we developed actually during the pandemic because, everything was closed down. And there's a section for you on the app that I've written a few programs, and there is a spring release and refresh. There's a summer, renewal, fall and winter sort of series to kind of talk about, again, what are the things that you can do during the spring. So it is about refreshing, releasing, renewing. That's what nature's doing. So I always tell people, try to release the heaviness in the mind too, anything that's creating heaviness in the mind, not just the body.
And so for those of you who might be new to Ayurveda who are listening, we think it's that, Ayurveda says it is that kapha accumulation that's creating that heaviness in the mind. And so that's why bringing in all these practices that reduce kapha in the body, reduce the element of earth and excess water, which is all that dampness, that like stagnancy, right? That's what's going to bring that lightness. So it's about all balance of the elements. And that's what really Ayurveda is at the core of Ayurveda.
Exactly. Like we use the terms kapha, but to us that means earth and water, and what earth and water mean are the qualities. So it's cold, heavy, damp, slow, sluggish, and sometimes those are qualities we need and they help us, as we get, at other times of the year. But because they're starting to accumulate in Ayurveda, we always bring balance by the opposite. We reduce bringing in things that are creating that imbalance, and we bring in the opposite. So we're going to bring in lightness and movement, especially. And so, and these are things we know, like, again, Ayurveda is a science of life. So when something's hot and it's too hot, we add cold. We don't add more hot. When something's, not moving, we make it move, and we want it to move. We move it, we push it, we make it go faster. We don't, stop it more, so it's like, it's so intuitive, right? Ayurveda.
I want to ask you a question about weight gain in seasons. So do you find that weight gain is more prevalent in the springtime, in the kapha time versus the winter time, which is the Vata time?
I mean, usually, again, it's that accumulation. So when we get to fall, we're coming out of fall, there's a little more activity, and then now we're slowing down. So then a month or 2 months later is when we see the full effects of that. And that's what Ayurveda would say. It's like, it doesn't always happen right away because there's this accumulation that happens. So it's in the late winter, early spring that we're going to notice, oh, now all of a sudden, I've gained these 10 pounds or whatever it is.
So if you guys are feeling a little slow or sluggish, it's normal. That's why we're talking about this. It's okay.
Exactly.
So pants are fitting a little more snug. Yeah, that's the time.
And again, it's like part of nature. And, at some level that's probably protective, for us. And again, if you live in a climate where you're not, it's not like a cold, hard winter, there's still some changes there, because of the position of the earth. So it's not that there aren't seasonal changes. And in fact, here in California, it's wetter, in November, December, January. That's when it rains here, and it's, kind of overcast. And so we get that heaviness relative to the rest of the year. So we definitely feel it here too. So again, we will naturally notice these things, but the earlier in the season, like as soon as, we make that transition after the, winter, solstice, then that's, again, we're transitioning into late winter or, and going into spring, then it's a good time to start going into more of your kapha balancing practices, so that it doesn't accumulate.
You would recommend then to start the seasonal balances in the previous season before the transition actually happens, right? So in the late winters, when you would start doing the kapha balancing stuff to get ahead of it before the spring actually sets in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, or you can wait till spring, the solstice. It's just that you may notice there's a little bit more that's accumulated, but that's going to be the peak. And that's why that's a good time to cleanse, that's going to be the peak. But if you want to preempt it a little bit, and of course it depends on everybody's primary nature, their prakruti. If you are a kapha and you're in kapha season, you're probably going to start to notice more of those imbalances a little bit sooner. If you're a vata or a pitta, you may, wait until the summer solstice, the spring equinox, because you're, so it's always, and that's the other thing in Ayurveda, you always want to see, how am I feeling in my body? Because that's, going to be your best guide. But yes, because there's an accumulation, if you're a kapha, especially during kapha season, you may want to start some of those things, and still do the cleanse and everything during the equinox. But, you really have to, because again, these are transitions, right? It's not like a light switch. So as soon as nature starts changing and we start changing, we might notice those things. Yeah. So that's the spring, and then we're going into summer. So we, and again, the longest day of the year, and we're talking Northern Hemisphere, the, peak is going to be that summer solstice, right? That's the longest day of the year. So we're already starting to accumulate Pitta energy going into summer, but especially then that's the peak. And then the days will start to get shorter until the fall equinox. But so around the summer solstice is a nice time to do, again, another cleanse. And they can be short little 3-day things you do at home where you just reboot your gut. You eat simple food, plant-based, soups or salad, depends on your digestion. Khichdi is of course, in the Ayurvedic tradition, a very easy to digest food for everyone all the time. Or maybe you do, juices or something, and take a little triphala, which is a great herb to rebalance the gut and really very safe for everyone. So, so khichdi is a really great thing to have during any cleanse, and it's good for all the doshas. It's very light and easy to digest.
Okay.
And so like during a cleanse, khichdi is very good. It's a traditional, it's very easy to digest, traditional Ayurvedic food eaten during cleanses. It's basmati rice, split mung beans with some gentle spices, cooked together. Very simple and easy to make. There's recipes online. So you can eat that. Also, depending on your digestion, if you are a Pitta, now we are in Pitta season, right? The heat is on, your Agni, your digestion, your digestive fire may be very strong. You might be able to do smoothies or juices, depending if you're somebody who has a little bit of a sluggish digestion. If you are a Kapha or Vata, you might still want to do like just some soups and khichdi and like warmer foods. So again, it kind of depends, but you can't go wrong with khichdi. And again, remember now it's been accumulating, and depending on where you live on the planet, if you live closer to the equator, it's going to be very hot, by the time it's the solstice. So you may want to start, again, you feel like, is it hot? What are the qualities of fire, right? With Pitta, fire and water, especially if you live in a humid place, but it's mostly fire, right? The summer, the sun, the heat. And so it's light, hot, sharp, intense. So what we want to do is think cooling. Of course, that's the number one balance for Pitta is cooling, but also that intensity, the intense sun, the intense moderation. So maybe you've been more active to get out of the winter time. And then of course, everyone wants to be super active in the summer, but actually that's a time for moderation and activity, and definitely not going out in the middle of the day to do your most intense activity. It's balance, right? So when the sun is hot and the heat is up here and you're doing intense exercise or activity outside, you're just going to get Pitta aggravated, and that creates inflammation in the body and the skin issues and the heat rashes and all kinds of things. So you may again want to start, and nature is going to start supplying these fresh fruits and vegetables and produce that starts in the spring, moving into, so then by summertime, you're eating more of like the summer salads and the fruits. And, maybe again, even though Ayurveda says don't drink cold water or ice water with your meals, sometimes between meals, if you're feeling hot, like some cool water can be helpful, so again, it's that balance. How hot are you feeling? How hot is it in your climate? But summer's all about heat and Pitta. So we're cooling, we're doing cucumber and, water and a lot of mint and cilantro and, all of the cooling herbs and spices. And so, and not just in food, but again, in movement and activity, moderation. You want to do more of your movement in the mornings, rather than in the middle of the day, mornings or evenings, sunrise or sunset. And actually, I just really, interesting lecture, and, now I'm going to go on a deep dive into the research, but
great.
It is, Ayurveda says, again, do more of your activity at sunrise or sunset. And that actually is the time, apparently, where we have more infrared rays. The sun's wavelengths, the wavelengths of light are even different at different times of the day. And the highest ultraviolet is in the middle of the day, which is a little more damaging for us. Infrared is a little more healing. So, Ayurveda, again, always taught these practices, and they make sense with now what we're learning with science. So moderation, also meditation, sleep, even though you still want to get that good sleep during being in bed by 10 and, up by 6 or a little bit earlier, now that the sun is sometimes where you live, if the sun is getting up or coming up earlier, that could be a time you feel awake getting up earlier with the sun, and that's okay as long as you're getting good restful sleep. Your routine, you want to make sure you're not eating too late. People are tempted to eat late because the days are longer, they're active, whatever, it's summertime. But trying to make sure you're still eating your evening meal by 6 or 7. I know a lot of cultures do eat later, and I think it's, they are more active. They're prepared in a way that makes it healthy and easier to digest. So if it's working for you, great. But, these are the Ayurvedic tips of checking in with yourself. And then keeping cool in the mind, when the heat is on in the mind, we get fiery. We can get a little more irritable, a little more angry, critical, judgy. That's our Pitta talking, no matter what your dosha is, but especially if you're a Pitta, you might notice that. So that's, again, just doing some reflection and cooling off and focusing on gratitude, maybe doing some gratitude meditations, or compassion. Those are very cooling emotions. They bring down the mind instead of being judgy and critical, and you're going to feel more compassionate and loving and kind toward people during those summer months when you might notice getting irritable. So that's important.
Frustration is definitely one of the hallmarks of having strong Pitta. You have little patience and get frustrated easily. So if you think about in the summer months, you might be more agitated because of the excess heat. Everyone, no matter what your primary body constitution is or what your primary dosha is, everybody has a higher propensity to get agitated during those really hot summer months. So the Pitta is going to be a little bit more on fire.
And one thing I did want to mention, because people typically think, oh, fire, and it is fire and Agni and digestion, so I should be able to eat more. My digestion should be better. But actually, sometimes because of the heat, that Jatha Agni, that digestive fire for our food actually kind of goes peripheral. It goes to the external because we're trying to cool off, and there's other things that are happening. to that heat. So sometimes we may not digest, well either during the summer. So we always need spices, but we might want to use cooling ones like coriander. There's a very classic coriander, cumin, and fennel tea, where you take a teaspoon of coriander seed, a teaspoon of cumin seed, a teaspoon of fennel, steep it in hot water, and then strain it out. And then you can sip on that throughout the day. It keeps your Agni balanced, even, during the summer, because it's about balance, yeah.
I was just going to say, that's actually a tea that I recommend, highly recommend during postpartum time. That was that was Isha Oak's go-to. I don't know if you're familiar with Isha Oak's, but that was her go-to postpartum tonic.
Yep. Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. Cumin, coriander, and fennel.
Yeah.
And for its rejuvenative qualities and balancing qualities and all of that. So yeah, and it's
great
cool
for all the doshas, and I definitely recommend it for pittas, during the summer, to kind of keep that Agni balance. So working, but not overworking, so, but yeah, people can drink that all year. It's a great, just gut tonic, digestive, tea, without, again, because sometimes we think of stimulating Agni with like really hot spices. And in the summer, you might want to minimize the ginger and the cayenne and the, the very spicy foods. But you can still keep your Agni strong with these, like the typical CCFT, we call it, right? Yeah. Coriander, cumin, and fennel. So that would be a great thing, to do throughout the summer. Awesome. So then we're now getting into, and again, some of the, even the oils in Ayurveda, we would change. Like if you're doing Abhyanga, you might use a little more coconut oil instead of a heating oil like sesame oil, on your skin. Coconut oil is more cooling.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So there's been like, I've heard, I love coconut oil, especially for massage. But I hear some controversial things where people say, but it clogs the pores and stuff like that. Like, do you have anything to say about that?
If it's a good natural organic coconut oil, it should absolutely not do that. Yeah. So
I love it. I've used it without problem on my clients, on myself.
Yeah, no, in fact, it's really good for places where there is clogging, because it's a little astringent, it's a little bit drying. So, sometimes if people, it can work for moisturizing, but if people are noticing they're feeling more dry, it can be the astringent quality of the coconut oil. So it's actually, it can help people who are having like too much oil or clogging. So yeah, no, again, as long as it's a good quality oil, it shouldn't cause any of those problems. And because the molecules are, natural, like we break them down into all of the healthy omegas and they're absorbed into the tissue and broken down. So yeah, that shouldn't happen. So it's a great oil to use all year, or sometimes, again, in Western medicine, I think there, again, isn't this appreciation of how our bodies and how we're affected by the seasons. So people do the same thing all year, and that's how we grow. And in Ayurveda, that's a setup for disease, doing the same thing all year. Nature doesn't do the same thing all year, So I always try to rotate things. I always try to rotate, and not do the same thing. And that's why these seasons are opportunities for us to change it up a little bit and ask ourselves, what do we need right now? What's nature? What are the high qualities outside, and how can I balance? And typically that means different things, Then we're coming, so the summer has peaked, the high heat, and it's starting now. The days are starting to get shorter, but it's still summer, right? Until the fall equinox. And so we may, again, still eating fruits and the fresh greens and salads, if you can digest them. For Vatas out there, you may, still find it challenging. Although in the summer, you may feel a little bit more able to digest those salads. And you can do CCFT also to keep your Agni strong. Maybe you add a little ginger or black pepper to yours for that little extra Agni stimulation.
During winter and spring.
And anytime. Or even during the summer, where we tell people to like kind of minimize the really spicy pungence. But for a Vata, if you're trying to digest all of those greens and, you may be going places and people are serving summer salads and things. And so typically, Vatas and even Kaphas might need to still use some of those pungent spices to keep their Agni strong. Pittas typically don't need that. They have a strong Agni, strong digestion.
Sorry, what were the examples of the pungent spices again?
Well, like black pepper is a great one. Ginger is great. And cayenne, for kaphas, a little cayenne, or some more spicy food like that. Yeah. For the cloves, again, it depends on what you like the flavor of, but cloves are a great pungent. But typically it's the black pepper, ginger, that you can add to stimulate your Agni. Another really great Agni stimulator. Now we're coming into fall, so things get a little irregular. I'll mention another great little Agni stimulator for people who are feeling their digestion in the fall and winter is sluggish. Okay. So again, now the days are getting shorter. Maybe we're becoming a little less active because the days are shorter, and now the wind and we're getting into the fall equinox. And so again, the position has changed on the earth. Things are starting to cool down. So think about, this is Vata season now we're going into. So Vata is cold, light, dry, mobile. So this is where, it starts to get windy, maybe it's cooler, it's drier. Again, you have to take into context where you're living, but there's some sort of seasonal change going on right now. So how is, what are the qualities that are changing in your environment? But the typical now is Vata season. So now we want to start, our Agni gets irregular because Vata is irregular, right? So this might be a time when we're noticing, oh, now I need to start supporting my Agni, my digestive fire, and start to ground too. So now nature's giving us maybe these pumpkins and these gourds and squashes. We're starting to transition to soups and stews as the weather's getting colder. Root vegetables are very grounding, right? So to balance the light and feeling like and also again, a part of it is all the activity and overstimulation from summertime. Now we need to calm and get grounded. So nature gives us all of these grounding vegetables and foods, and even the late summer, early fall fruits, and things. They're more grounding, they're juicier, they're like kind of heavier because we want to get grounded now. We want to, and now we may need to start, because those foods are a little heavier, we still want to support our digestion. And so a really great Agni stimulator right before you eat is a slice of ginger, just fresh ginger. You put a little tiny dash of salt on it and a squeeze or a little dash of lime juice, and chew on that. And that right before you eat. And it really helps get all the enzymes flowing, gets the saliva going, like all of our natural ways that we digest food. It's going to stimulate our natural digestive process.
Oh my God, that's great. My son would be like, oh, spicy, so spicy.
I know. Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's
and
great. That will really kickstart.
It works great. Yeah. And so if people don't have that, sometimes I'll recommend ginger tea. And then you can add a little bit of black pepper. Again, these pungents that really, it's like your gas lighter or your fluid, lighter fluid on your digestive fire. Yeah. And actually that's what science is showing, is that these pungent spices and sour, so a little bit of lemon or lime, that's why, that's typically squeezed on there. It stimulates, right? When you bite into a lemon, you feel your saliva going, and it's good at getting flow and movement, and all of those ducts and channels are natural. And there's a lot more to saliva than just the enzymes. It's like actually very cleansing for our mouth. And so, stimulates the digestive process right from the mouth, and then gets things moving. Those pungent spices help keep movement in our gut, and then stimulating the digestive enzymes down below, and support and activate them so they're working more optimally. So those little pungent spices can really be helpful. And again, if those aren't spices, if they're too spicy or hot, because, again, if you're a Pitta, you can just do your CCFT. That works too. Wow. But actually ginger is an interesting one, because even though it's like, it tastes pungent, and the first taste is pungent, but post-digestively it's sweet. So it can be balancing for Pittas, down lower in the gut, but you have to be able to, like the pungency of it when you bite into it.
And let me ask you about that. There is a difference between fresh ginger and powdered ginger on the effect on Pitta, right?
Yes, yes. Typically, dried ginger is considered more heating. So the fresh ginger may be more, a little better for pittas. Although there are some pitta conditions where you still use dried ginger as well, but it's usually mixed with other cooling, herbs and spices. So again, it's all about the synergy. Like Ayurveda is amazing because it's the synergy of all of the things you're combining. So even if one thing might be a little, not as balancing for you, if you're adding to it things that are more cooling, you can get the benefits of the ginger without the overheating. Yeah. And it's interesting in nutritional and food science, when you dry ginger, I mean, you would expect it looks different, right? It feels different, but they're like different phytochemical makeup in those things. It's not the same thing. It's not the same food really, So it has similar, there's gingerols and shoggols and other phytochemicals, but they're more concentrated, more gingerols like in the fresh ginger, and they're more shoggols or one of the other phytonutrients in the dried ginger. So the composition changes. So it makes sense in Ayurveda that, people would be like, oh, ginger is ginger. Why do they say dry ginger here and wet ginger here? Well, because they're molecularly different. And so there's this knowledge that when we ingest it, it's going to have different qualities and different effects on our physiology. So I'm always fascinated by the wisdom in Ayurveda. Yeah. So again, this could be a time now going into the fall that we start to support our Agni, and then we're eating more grounding foods, definitely a meditation and breathing practice, because, again, this turbulence of our nervous system being overactivated from the summer and the fall. And breathing is, again, one of my favorite practices for calming the nervous system. And then again, a nice time to sit down and do a cleanse and reflect on, the last season, and let go of anything that's not serving you. And now you're kind of, going into the, setting intentions. I mean, we focus on that at the new year, but, maybe you're starting to get more reflective now, moving into the fall. And then sleep can become very important. Some people may find your sleep changes throughout the year because there's different elements. Now it's lighter and more mobile, is a quality of Vata. You might notice it takes a little longer for your mind to settle down. And so you may need more support for your sleep during the fall. If not, that's fine, but again, these are all things that you want to look at that can be explained by these seasonal changes. And then fall equinox, now it's getting colder, progressively shorter days into the winter solstice. And then again, that's that transition from Vata season into Kapha season. And, again, the solstice is a great time to do a cleanse, but, sometimes we focus after the holidays, at least in our modern society. So that's a good time to do another cleanse. And again, maybe then that's when you transition to doing more of your Kapha balancing. So you can see how you're moving through the seasons with your different practices, including foods, but also practices and activities and what's going on in your mind, and, adjusting your daily routine accordingly. Again, now in the winter, maybe you're using more warming oils. You're drinking more warm teas and warm foods and liquids to support the cold of Vata and Kapha. And again, it depends on your dosha. If you're a Vata going into Vata season, you really should slow down and get grounded. You're going to feel it more maybe than a Kapha would, who naturally has a little more groundedness and calmness in them. But we all, again, as I mentioned, no matter what our nature is, we are all going through transitions during these seasonal changes, just like nature is, because we're part of nature. Yeah. And so, maybe again, I just tell people reflect on what qualities are high at that time of year. And, Ayurveda gives these guidelines, but you can also notice and feel, because people do live on different parts of the planet. And what can I do to bring in a little bit of the opposite so that I don't accumulate too much of these qualities or elements, during those seasons.
Mhm. I have a question about the Vata season. So when officially does the Vata season begin and end? Because it crosses through
Right.
2 seasons, right?
Yeah. Typically we would say at the fall equinox, but it's again, just like the tide, there's a transition going on, but you're fully into, like, that's the peak, right? So you're actually starting to go into the fall before that, but then that's going to be the peak. So you're definitely in Vata season at the fall equinox. And then you continues Vata season until the winter solstice. Mm-hmm.
And then the winter solstice, when does Kapha, when would you say that Kapha starts? Would be then?
Yeah, that's around then, because that's when, Vata is starting to come down. That's going to typically be, that's the shortest day of the year. There's still, again, depending on where you live, many months of winter sometimes. But then you're officially into Kapha season until the really early spring. And then even though we think of Pitta as summer solstice or summer, that's going to start, definitely there's a transition going on. So that's starting even before the summer solstice.
Are they equally spread out then? Like they each have about this because of that transition?
Yeah, it's about 4 months. Yeah, it's about 4 months, right? Yeah. And so there's 3 doshas, right? And there's 4 transitional times. So they're really overlapping. Those are usually they correlate, but there's, again, I always tell people, remember, there's an ebb and a flow going on. So there's like an accumulation. And usually you're in Kapha season at the winter solstice, but the maximum accumulation is at the spring solstice, because you're still accumulating Kapha during that time. And so and so it's again, the start of the Vata season might be around the fall equinox, but you're continuing to accumulate Vata, so the peak may be at the winter solstice. So you're still.
That makes a lot of sense now. Yeah. Now that just clicked for me, because I was still trying to sense how, there's like you said, the 3 doshas, but 4 seasons. So what exactly, how is the relationship? But that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So it's, Ayurveda gives us all these amazing tips to stay balanced during the seasons. And again, I always tell people that yes, it's food, and Ayurveda gives us a whole amazing nutritional science around that. And it's also activity, again, in the fall, the Vata time, with movement, sometimes now if you did overdo it during the summer, even though we say moderation, now is the time to maybe do, really slow down, as I mentioned. And so now you're doing restorative yoga, you're doing slower walks, in nature, like calming, you're thinking calming and grounding. You're trying to stay calm. And then again, so then when you go into Kapha season, that's when you might want to start it. Now you can start to increase your movement again. But I think this is a big problem. People just stay too active. They don't slow down according to the seasons like nature does. And then you just accumulate this Vata. And, for all of us, Vata imbalance it pushes the other doshas out of balance, and it correlates to the nervous system and all of that sympathetic overdrive. And so I think, that's activity is really something to pay attention to. It's natural to slow down and at certain times of the year going into the winter, and then, and then you can start moving again. And that's okay. Some people feel like, no, I run my 5 miles every day and I'm going to do it no matter what. It's like our mind. Yeah.
Pitta overdrive is
and then what I see is you start having like menstrual issues and all kinds of things because you're pushing that too hard, and there's a time to nurture and do your self-care and be grounded and calm. And then there's another time, like there's a time and a season for all things.
Well, Dr. Patel, this has been absolutely fascinating. And I hope that for you listening, that it really sheds light on the importance of Ayurveda and how it really just makes it just makes so much sense. All of it makes sense. And it's vast as well. It's not just something that was like, it's not fluff. I mean, there's really a lot of substance to why the recommendations are what they are, and they are so customizable because it doesn't even just depend on the season. It depends on your own personal makeup, what's happening in your life at the time. You have to use a lot of common sense to really understand how to apply this. But just from what we learned today from Dr. Patel, you can already see how making certain choices with your diet, with your lifestyle, with your approach to your daily routine, the wake and the sleep cycles and the meditation and all of that, just how that alone can be done to synchronize with the changing seasons. And that alone can make a really big impact on how you manage your health over the long run. And this is what Ayurveda teaches us. It's not about going to get help and seeking balance after you have a really big problem, right? Like these are preventive methods. Of course, after you have a condition, there's no better time than to start practicing Ayurveda. But the real, I think the real gem in Ayurveda is using this as a lifestyle system so that we can keep disease and chronic issues at bay to the best of our ability if you follow these recommendations, these time tested. And now, as Dr. Patel is showing and sharing with us, backed by science. More and more, the more research is being done on this every day, and it's more and more being backed by science. The things that were downloaded by the rishis, right now, they're being proved to be true by those of us conducting these research studies. So it's really amazing. And I really, really want to just express my gratitude to you, Dr. Patel, for coming on. It's so fascinating to learn from you and to have you shed light on how we can use Ayurveda through the season. This is exactly what this show is about. And this was such an impactful conversation and discussion, and just, beautiful outpouring of your wisdom to us. So I really, really appreciate you and your time for doing this with us here today.
Well, thanks to you. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is one of my favorite things to do, is talk about Ayurveda. That's very inspiring. It inspires me that we have this amazing wisdom within us, and it will start to awaken as you create an Ayurvedic lifestyle. And and as you said, it's really about being, preventing disease and creating health on a daily basis, so you can actually be healthier tomorrow than you are today, And so even if you feel like you're a healthy person, like sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, like, it just elevates you to like spaces you never thought you could reach, in your healing and your health and your thriving. Like it's like true thriving and again, spiritual well-being, and then when we're feeling healthy and well, then we have the natural outcome is we want to share that with others, and we want to help others, and we have the energy and the vitality and the clarity to do that, because sometimes we want to do that and we just don't feel good. And so take care of yourself first is what I always tell people. And Ayurveda, sometimes, an Ayurvedic practitioner I mentored with would say, I always frustrate people because they say, okay, I have this condition. What should I take? What should I do? And then the true answer is always, it depends, like, let's talk more, let's go more information. So people first learning Ayurveda sometimes can feel frustrating because we're used to just hearing, oh, you have this, take this.
Yeah,
oh,
take that. Yeah, let me give you prescription.
So it's really, a good practitioner is going to say, okay, let's get more information. Let me really understand. And so you can be a practitioner of yourself and ask all the questions. Don't, like sometimes people will Google like, oh, I have this problem. And so what herb should I take? And that can be helpful. And of course, Ayurveda has an amazing pharmacopoeia, but there's more to it, and so I would say, look at all of those pillars of health. Think about the qualities and the doshas and what's out of balance, and how, you want to take the information and then always go back to yourself. So yeah, it's been really fun. And again, I would say if you want to hear more, like kind of my perspective on seasons, and again, a lot of the tips I just talked about, I share, it's in the seasonal series on our Chopra meditation and wellbeing app. And it's in the For You section. It's a little hard to find, but so I have one again for each season, and it talks exactly about what we talked about. Yeah.
Love that. Thank you. And we also have a free gift. So the link is going to be below. So click on that. And it is Dr. Patel's free gift to everybody. So make sure you sign up for that so you can get that. And we just really are so grateful for all of that. So thank you. And the app is going to be amazing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Take care.
So blessings to you, Dr. Patel, blessings to everybody watching and listening. And we will tune in again next month, next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.